hoping just to be able to impart a little bit of my work and experience. I did a study some 20 years ago on the effects of acupuncture on sleep. And at that time, of course, I researched all the literature about sleep problems. And as classically, there are a few patterns described in TCM textbooks, but when you have your patients, either they don't fit the patterns or they are presenting several patterns. And for any of you who have had to tackle this difficult problem of sleep, people who come seeking treatments are usually not those who have had a sleep disturbance since a few weeks. It's usually people who have had 20 years of sleep disturbance. And of course, it's like headaches. It's not one pattern, it's several patterns. Often several problems are intricated. That's why it makes the treatment much more complex. And another point is that in the work I've done, of course, there's a lot of referencing to classical texts and classical information we have, but also there is a lot of things that we know, but it's not written down. And it would be pity to miss these points. I always mention that the Chinese medicine that has come down to us today has three origins. Of course, the classics, all the classical texts that have survived, actually, because there are texts that have disappeared. Then there is the oral tradition, and the oral tradition especially was kept alive in China in the Taoist tradition, as they had healers, and it was transmitted from master to disciple. And of course, the third tradition is the other countries which have been practicing Chinese medicine. Amongst them, for example, Vietnam, Japan, and of course in Europe, France, who was the first country who was actually exposed to Chinese medicine, interested in Chinese medicine, and now we can say we have almost 100 years of French acupuncture experience. Now, to disregard these traditions under the pretext that they were not written in the old classical text would be missing a lot of interesting concepts and approaches. And that's my sort of emphasis in the work I've done here, and also I'll be presenting tomorrow another presentation on management of pain, again based very much on the French-European school. Now, this is a result of a mixture of these things, plus my own concoctions, if I may call them so, and sort of extrapolations. Now, first of all, when we talk about sleep in Chinese medicine, I'm before anything a physician and a Western, although I come from the Middle East originally, but I'm more tending to a Western logical experimental thinking. So when I studied Chinese medicine, I did not take anything for granted. When the concepts were given, for me, these concepts had to clinically show results. And I was very lucky that at that time I was a resident in the hospital, and I could practice immediately what I learned and test it, put it to the test. And a lot of Chinese concepts are not on face value what they should be. For example, the simple fact of mu points. Mu points, alarm points, are not what we say they are when they are painful. We say the organ is affected, the organ is sick, but which organ are we talking about? Now, the topic is not that. What I'm trying to say is that please do not buy anything or take anything for granted. Whatever we give you, experiment. If it works, keep it. If it doesn't work, throw it away. So there is no... Now, what is sleep? In the West, in the recent years, a lot of emphasis has been put on sleep to understand sleep. Why is that? It's because it's one of the human activities, not only human, but also all animals, is that it's necessary to life. We always say we need air, water, and food to survive. And in Chinese medicine, we know that the first unit, what we call first unit in the circulation of qi, starts with lung channel, followed large intestine, stomach and spleen. We call that the first unit. And the first unit is all about survival, air and water and food. But it follows immediately after with the heart channel. And what is the heart channel doing in that sequence? It's basically the residence of Shen. And we see that one of the functions of Shen, one of the primary functions of Shen, is consciousness, and of course, when the Shen is suspended, sleep. So we see that sleep is as vital to life as air, water, and food. Of course, you stop breathing after 2 minutes, you asphyxiate, you stop eating, you can survive longer. Without water, you survive maybe 10 days. But without sleep, they have done tests to see how long people can survive without sleep. And every time on voluntary base, they had to suspend the experiments after several weeks because people would start behaving strangely. There would be no physiological changes, but the mind would start misbehaving, and people start losing their minds. They start hallucinating, they start having psychotic behaviors. So sleep is known to be essential to life, and yet today we don't know why we sleep. This is what is fabulous. Now, it is said that it is a naturally recurring condition of rest for the body and the mind. And they have seen that all animals, mammals, and even reptiles and fish, they sleep. Anybody who's done diving here at night, you will observe fish sleeping at the bottom of the sea. They make a little bubble and they sleep in it. It's fabulous. So sleep is essential to life. And some facts. We sleep 1/3 of our lives. Now, sometimes we forget how important that is. If we live, let's say, a good lifespan of 80, 90 years, 30 years is spent sleeping. And from that, about a quarter is spent dreaming. Now, obviously, these are the sleep time changes from the infant. The sleep time is about 20 hours, and it slowly reduces to stabilize itself around 6 to 7 hours in an adult person. Now, why do we sleep? That's still a question neuroscientists are asking. We have done a lot of progress, a lot has been discovered, but still we don't know why exactly we need this, what we call sleep. Now, as I mentioned before, sleep deprivation does not cause any physiological disbalances in the body, except it provokes, after a certain time, psychotic episodes. And when there has been a sleep deprivation, there is a compensation that takes place. That means that the person who's going to sleep not so many hours, but they are going to increase 2 phases of the sleep, deep sleep and paradoxical sleep, which is dreaming stage. That means that when we have had lack of sleep, and when we can catch up, we don't catch up in total of sleep, but what is absolutely necessary. And we are going to explore this a bit further. It seems that the deep stage sleep, which I'll describe it in a moment, is more for physical repair. So the body goes into a total atonia, where all the muscles are relaxed and the brain has very, very slow activity, and here the body repairs itself. Whereas the dreaming phase is mainly for the brain to release its accumulated toxins. Now, first of all, the sleep-wake cycle is the most important cycle in the human being. And what is very interesting, if you remember the original Chinese, for them, the rhythm of life was this alternating rhythm of day and night. It's represented in the ancient representation of yin and yang, where you have the yang, the sunny side of the hill, and yin, the shaded side of the hill, which shows the alternance of yin and yang, day and night. Scientists have wondered if our circadian cycles coincided with the day and night cycle of the Earth. We know the Earth rotates and it has a cycle of 24 hours and some minutes. And so they did experiments by putting people in sort of isolation away from daylight. All clocks were removed and people were left to find their own internal rhythms, to sleep and wake at their own will, without having any rhythms imposed by society or by daylight and nighttime. What is very interesting, they were expecting to find a rhythm close to 24 hours. No, they found a rhythm close to 25 hours. They still are debating the reason for this strange internal clock. Some scientists have said, but this corresponds to the rotation of planet Mars. I'll let you pull your own conclusions. Is man coming from planet Mars? And in that case, are women coming from Venus? That's Now, keep this rhythm of 25. I will come back to it. It's very interesting. The Chinese had noticed it. Now, that is fabulous. We have, within this rhythm of the circadian rhythm, we have what is called an ultradian rhythm, which is about 12 hours, which explains that in most civilized countries, people have a nap after lunch. Now, this I found on the internet. It's the biological clock, not at all Chinese. This is done by Western scientists on a sort of an adult, a young adult in a healthy condition. And you will notice what is very interesting, a very curious correlation with the famous Chinese midnight clock. Now, what is important for sleep, obviously, is the melatonin release in the brain, which enhances sleep, and then the melatonin that stops in the early morning, which is going to enhance waking. Plus, the body temperature is very important because there is a correlation between deep sleep and lowered body temperature. We know that when we sleep, we usually need a blanket. Now, this again, keep in mind because I will make a parallel with the Chinese system. Other things, some of them are interesting. For example, the most likely time for bowel movement, which corresponds in the Chinese system, basically we say 5 to 7 is the time ideally, and we see that also observed. Some other things are strange. For example, 9 o'clock is the highest time of testosterone release. Usually that is not the most ideal time to follow. And what is very interesting, we see the fastest reaction time corresponds to the bladder channel or bladder organ time. And we know the bladder connection with the back shu and the dermatomas and all the nerves that communicate with the spinal cord and the periphery. Greatest cardiovascular efficiency, that is strange, but anyway, that's what they have discovered. And so we see that some of the sort of clocks, as we have discovered them, I remind you, this is an average adult, correspond to the Chinese system. Now, in the situation of sleep, we need to know about how we structure the sleep and how we analyze sleep. Sleep is analyzed today in laboratories, which are called sleep laboratories. And there is a combination of electroencephalogram, cardiogram, and also spirogram to analyze breathing, because we know there is more and more problems of sleep apnea, so to see how people breathe. Also to monitor the blood pressure, the heart pulse, of course, and also in men, they sometimes use the penile ring to measure the turgescence in the penis. Interestingly, during dreaming phase, there is a blood flow to the external genitalia, which Western medicine absolutely has no explanation for. And of course, they use this method to diagnose between primary and secondary impotence in men, or erectile problems in men, because even men who have problems, erectile problems, they might have a normal blood flow during dreaming, which eliminates the primary causes. Anyway, in the stages of sleep, this has been changed. Originally, they were classifying into 4 stages. Today, the new classification is N1, N2, and N3. What interests us most is the N3 stage, which basically it's defined by an activity of the brain which is very slow and called the delta wave or delta activity. And usually when we get reports from sleep laboratories, the delta activity is measured as a reflection of the quality of sleep. And so they call that delta sleep. For us, in practical terms, that corresponds to deep sleep. The other phases, N1 and N2, are what fill up the night, but they are not important phases. And the difference between people who sleep short and those who sleep long is basically the long sleepers have longer N1 and N2. And the shorter sleepers, basically, they have a more N3 and a more paradoxical sleep in a shorter time. There are some people like Leonardo da Vinci was famed to sleep 20 minutes every 6 hours, I think. So it doesn't make much sleep. But what he did was, obviously, he managed in that short time to go very deep in sleep. This, of course, with practice also can improve. If you've done yoga and so on, you can improve that quality, that part. Now, paradoxical sleep, or REM sleep, for those who are familiar with this term, it's rapid eye movement, is a phase where eyes are moving, the body is paralyzed, apparently, and the person has a very intense brain activity as though he was awake and living the situation. So this is the dreaming phase, and dreaming has been demonstrated to have the same importance for health as sleeping does. They have done experiments by distinguishing when a person was starting to dream and giving an impulse to wake the person up very superficially, so they don't really wake up, they just come out of the dream and continue sleeping. They sleep 9-10 hours a night, and after 3-4 weeks, they start having the same psychological disturbances as observed in people who don't sleep. So we know that we need to dream. There are many dream theories, which I have sort of explored a bit in the book. None of them are, every person, I mean, there might be about 15 different dream theories, and none of them are really satisfactorily explaining all the aspects of dreaming. Now, what happens during dreaming, and that, again, I borrowed from the internet, is that parts of the brain which are in white are disconnected, so they're not active. That's why the person does not have movements. Usually, most of them are the motor cortex, the sensory cortex. The person does not perceive sounds or smells in the same way as when you're awake. Of course, if the sound is very loud, the person may wake up. But what is very interesting is that there are parts of the brain, the visual cortex, and especially the limbic area and the cerebellum are active, which means that the person seems to see things. That's what dreams are. We see images. The limbic area and the amygdala are the emotional responses to what we see. As though we see scenery, we respond to them emotionally. And of course, we know that the basal ganglia, the cerebellum, all that, are controlling basically the autonomous system, the heartbeat, the breathing, etc. So actually, we live an emotional experience during our dreams as though we were experimenting or witnessing the situation. Now, this is a very interesting discovery. It's very recent. It's only with imagery that they have been able to sort of visualize that. But this comes back to also a lot of other dream concepts that we have in Chinese medicine. Now, what is interesting also is that sleep has cycles, which we call sleep cycles, and they are usually, we say, between 60 and 90 minutes long, and they are defined by the occurrence of a dreaming phase, usually at the end of the cycle. So that means that every time we go through N1, N2, deep sleep, we come out of deep sleep into paradoxical sleep, dreaming phase, and then usually at the end of the dreaming phase, there is a moment of waking. Depending on the length of this waking time, we will remember or not the dream. Some people, when we do in sleep laboratory, all of that is registered by graphs. So we can very clearly see that here the person was having a dreaming phase, and here they woke up for a few seconds and went back to sleep. So here the dream will be forgotten. As the night goes on, the dream phase gets longer. And that's why we often remember the last dreams that we have had. With training, of course, people manage to remember more and more dreams. Dreams could occupy between 15 to 20 minutes of each cycle, and you can do your maths in a nighttime. They could take from 20 to 25% of the sleep time could be taken in dreaming. Now, this is very important because we are today, yesterday was very interesting. I was listening to Dr. Cummings talking about the politics of assessment, of methods. And I realized I did a study, and it was my first and my last study I'll ever do, because what is very interesting is that all studies today that come out are biased. Who is paying for that study? What is the aim of the outcome? Now, nobody has interest to prove that acupuncture works for sleep. Why is that? You just have to look. Yesterday he was talking about one laboratory. You just have to look what in France, year after year, is the highest selling, single highest selling drug in France. It's sort of the hit parade of medicines. It's diazepam, Valium. The French are popping it. Now, okay, we say the French are stressed and we are fine here and whatever, but I think one country represents the others, and we are talking about industrialized countries, and people are more stressed, they have more sleep problems, and they're popping Valium like this. It helps them relax at night and go to sleep. A lot are using it for 25, 30 years. When they come to see us with sleep problems, what challenge are they giving us? I'm under sleeping pills for 20 years. Can you get me off them? Sure, yeah, I have recipe here. I'm going to do a few points. Heart 7, every book is saying heart 7, 6. Stop your pills. And they stop it, and they spend the whole night with eyes wide open. So that's not a solution. Nobody's interested. Who's interested to stop the population taking pills and have acupuncture? So we have to be very logical about these things. We are up against much more powerful politics and finances. In Chinese medicine, I couldn't resist the photos of animals sleeping. I have dozens and dozens of them. There were not enough chapters in this presentation to show them all. Now, in Chinese medicine, obviously, this is the basic balance between yin and yang. Daytime activity is yang, considered to nighttime activity, and sleep, which is yin. But of course, the state of health is a balance between yin and yang. And we see that this is an ideal image. The balance of yin and yang is not something static, it's in time. It's dynamic because we are more yang during the day and more yin at night. There are the well-known balance of yin and yang and the 4 phases, and of course we see that sleep, deep sleep, corresponds to the phase of maximum of yin, in which also yang is born. Remember the famous Tai Chi yin-yang balance, where we have the maximum of yin, we always have the beginning of yang. Now this is very important to understand, that if we do not reach a maximum of yin, we cannot give birth to a good quality yang. So it's very simple. You don't sleep, you're tired the next day. You know, it's the sort of common sense, but why? The why is because the yang is not capable of regenerating during the time where the yin reaches its maximum. Now, the normal sleep time is adapted basically to activity. So this would be more conditioned in an adult, where about, let's say, 1/3 of the time we sleep and 2/3 we are active. Now, one thing very interesting also that science has noticed is that usually the sleep time is not only adapted to the activity of the past day, but also it could adapt to upcoming challenges. For example, they have noticed sportive people who are going to do a big marathon race the next day, so they will be needing a lot of energy. When they are in a healthy state, they sleep deeper the night before. So in a sense, what they are doing is they are accumulating reserves for the next day. Of course, I said when we are well trained, because most of us, when we have some exciting event happening the next day, we have a terrible night. We don't sleep well. So the next day we are not as performant as otherwise. Now, what is important in our work is to evaluate this cycle in our patients. The depth of sleep is defining how well we sleep. And this is a problem in patients when we ask them, how well do you sleep? How many hours do you sleep? How many hours is, of course, the duration of the sleep. How many hours does not reflect on the quality alone. How deep did you sleep? And of course, this is very important because when we analyze sleep, we say, are you asleep 8 hours? Are you tired when you wake up? If a person says, yes, I'm still feeling I didn't sleep enough, this tells me the quality of sleep was disturbed. Of course, if the length is disturbed, it's simple. People say, I go to bed and I have to spend 2 hours waiting for sleep to come. Or I go to bed, I sleep at 4 in the morning, I'm up and I cannot sleep anymore. We'll see that each of these has a diagnostic value. Or I wake up in the middle of the night and I stay awake 2 hours. So here we see the length of sleep is shortened. But when the quality is poor, people will say things like, I sleep 8 hours, but I don't sleep well. Maybe they're having sleep apnea. We know that, for example, they have discovered that people stop breathing. So they are constantly in a state of stress. And they sleep 8 hours, but they are exhausted when they wake up. They don't breathe. Or they snore. Snoring is like sleep apnea. It disturbs the sleep. Imagine having a sort of ongoing truck engine next to your head all night, even if you manage to sleep. It's not great quality. Or they have a lot of dreams, what we call dream-disturbed sleep. The dreaming time is taking over the night, which means deep sleep is disturbed. Or they can have physical symptoms, somatic symptoms, for example, restless leg syndrome, or muscle cramps, or after menopause, classically, hot flashes. Or they can have other somatic symptoms. We'll have a look at that. So all of these things which can come and disturb sleep. And it's very interesting, where, for example, we have in even skin diseases could be a cause of insomnia. Pruritus, itching. You itch at night, even if you don't wake up, it disturbs the shen. So in a sense, it wakes you up. Now, one thing which I have brought in, which is not classically found in textbooks they give you TCM patterns. Now, I have to step back a little bit. I remind you that classical Chinese medicine, at its very origins, was basically diagnosing and treating with the concept of yin and yang. So they spoke about yang excess, yin excess, yang deficiency, yin deficiency, and balanced state of yin and yang. This we are talking a few thousand years back. Then slowly came in the concept of channels. So the channel system concept followed the yin-yang. And then they were really working with the concept of channels. After that came in the concept of the substances. So we are talking about qi, blood, fluids, shen, and jing. And only after that, much later, once the five-phase theory was integrated into Chinese medicine, did they start talking about the zangfu as the ministers of the state. And today, TCM is starting with the zangfu. So what I can tell you is that we have many approaches to the same problem. It doesn't mean that sleep should only be analyzed with the zangfu or with the substances or with the channels or whatever. So what I've tried to do is to give you all these different approaches. But one thing where sleep has not been really explored are the extraordinary channels. And there is a reason for that. First of all, we know, and it's mentioned, that the extraordinary channels, the 8 extraordinary, precede the formation not only of the zangfu, but even the body. The first, what we call the first ancestry, Chong, Ren, and Du, are the first ones to even organize the original cell and the division of the cells, subsequent formation of the body. So they are really primary channels. I include Daime there. That's my personal belief that Daime is included in the first ancestry. So they are, in a sense, not only the original formational system, but after birth, and especially after the first cycle of life, which Chinese are defining in cycles of 7 and 8. Remember, 7 for girls and 8 for boys. It's symbolic, it's not mathematical. The kidneys become firm. And as they become firm, the 4 other extraordinary channels, which we call the second and third ancestry, they start functioning. And the child is going to develop his or her own rhythms, independent of the mother. We always say in Chinese medicine that the child embodies the rhythms of the mother during the first years of their life via the zongqi of the mother, which has been nourishing the child throughout the fetal stage. And after birth, the child has to develop their own rhythm, which only can affirm itself at the age of 7 or 8, where we have all the signs and symptoms, not symptoms, signs of maturity of the kidneys. The permanent teeth start growing, the hair gets stronger, and the child often develops his own character. Says no. The no saying. Of course, we see kids today, they say no much earlier. But they're also more mature. They mature faster. So the cycles of 7 and 8 are symbolic. Now, what happens is that the extraordinary channels are regulating all these internal rhythms, internal developments, but also they are in contact with the outer world. They regulate our inner milieu in accordance to the outer changes. So in which case, extraordinary channels should be the first exploration we do in working with sleep. But the question is, which channels? There is no, I remind you, I said extraordinary channels were not used in Chinese medicine. Why? Because they believed that they were rooted in pre-heaven, and that pre-heaven you could not treat with post-heaven approach. So extraordinary channels were there, explained, described, but never touched. You cannot touch pre-heaven. Sun Simiao was the first one who started using extraordinary and describing opening points. But if you look in classical texts, what do we find about extraordinary channels? Opening points, complementary points, but there are no indications as such. A few are given here and there. But there's no sort of a classical approach. It seems that people who used the extraordinary channels did not dare talk about it or write it down. It was passed down orally. Countries like Japan, who were not bound by the same limitations as China in those days, they explored the extraordinary much more freely. Extraordinary channels are sort of the day-to-day work in Japanese acupuncture, whereas in Chinese acupuncture, there's still quite a bit of respect. Say, we should not needle them more than once a week. We should not needle them before the age of 7 in children, and so on and so forth. We should not needle 2 extraordinary in the same session. So there's a lot of precaution and respect, which is true. It is important to take those precautions. But in working, analyzing, and treating sleep, I believe extraordinary should come first. And I hope I have time to give you some examples. And it's thanks to the extraordinary that the inner system adapts to the outer changes. Now, as I told you, there are other considerations. One consideration are the substances. And in the substances, sleep and wake seem to be closely related to the movements of Wei Qi. Now, the Ling Shu has a chapter, obscure chapter, saying that the Wei Qi circulates on the surface of the body 25 times. Why 25? That is a very strange number. I always wondered at the beginning, why 25 times on the surface? And who counted it? We know that the Ying Qi circulates throughout the channels once in 24 hours. And each channel system gets a tide of energy for 2 hours. But Wei Qi circulates 25 times. This indicates that it's much faster than Ying Qi. It also indicates that it circulates outside the primary channels. Yes. Then they say it penetrates at the ankle at night. Ankle. What do we have there? We have 2 extraordinary channels which are called the heel channels. Today we call them stepping or skipping, which is, for me, it doesn't make a sense, but heel is very important, or ankle channels, the qiao. There are 2 of them. They start at the ankles, and what is special about these 2? They join at bladder 1, Jingming bladder 1. And what do the texts say? They say that Wei Qi emerges at the corner of the eye in the morning, and that makes the eyes open. Of course, it's an ancient description, super ancient. First of all, the circulation of 25. What happens to Wei Qi during the night? The Wei Qi goes into the organs and circulates following the Ke cycle. What does that tell us? Why does it go in the organs? What is the function of Wei Qi? It's to release pathogenic factors. Which pathogenic factors are we talking about? Maybe external pathogens that have gone in, maybe internal pathogens. And what are the internal pathogens? They are the emotions. Who is in charge of the movements of Wei Qi? The general of the army, liver. So the liver is going to be the manager that makes the Wei Qi go in, and it's going to be responsible for Wei Qi circulating amongst the organs. And here, a little flashback at the theories, dream theories. We say dreams are the department of the liver, the Hun. The Hun is in charge of dreaming. And why do we dream? In part, to release the pathogens. And we know that in the Sowen, there is a whole description of dreams and significance of dreams in relation to pathogenic factors. You recall this passage, it's a classic passage. We don't know what to do with it sometimes. If you dream of fire, it means there is pathogenic heat in the heart. If you dream of water and drowning, it's the cold pathogen, etc., etc. And then they talk about the weakness or strength of the organs. Not strength, but fullness of the organs. Weakness and fullness because of pathogenic factors. So that's already a clear statement that one of the functions of the liver during the night is to release pathogenic factors via the dreams. But that is only one aspect of dreaming. We have many other types of dreams. The dreams are not only to release pathogenic factors. Now, so I mentioned the 25-time cycle, which coincidence that is the same as the internal rhythm that modern science has discovered that we have. Maybe it's a coincidence. I find Chinese medicine is full of coincidences. Another coincidence is that the Chinese have mentioned that Wei Qi goes in. When Wei Qi goes in, one of the functions of Wei Qi is to keep the surface body temperature. And we know that sleep occurs, and deep sleep occurs during the lowest body temperature time. So there is a correlation between the movement of Wei Qi and deep sleep. Science has also discovered, and they have not explained it, if you go and research all the theories on sleep and dreams, you'll come up with a lot of what they say unexplained observations, that sleep also seems, they say seems to be related to the immune system. They have no explanation, no idea why that means that during sleep we know that our immune system goes down, we are more vulnerable to external pathogens, more people die during the night. Obviously, our immune system is less effective at night. Okay, these are some correlations. And now what happens if we take the Wei Qi? Wei Qi during the day is in charge of maintaining muscle tone, amongst other things. We know that there's a lot of Wei Qi in the Jing-Jin sinew channels, and sinew channels, or what the French call tendinomuscular channels, are responsible for muscle tone and protection. So the fact that Wei Qi retires from the surface allows for the muscles to relax. And that is the first phase of sleep, N1. There is drowsiness. The Wei Qi is removed from the orifices. It's removed from the brain. So the brain activity slows down. The eyes sort of become heavy. There's drowsiness that sets in, and the muscles become relaxed. Actually, I saw that they are experimenting with different devices against falling asleep when you're driving. And of course, they have these laser things that analyze the eyelids. And when you start drooping your eyelids, it gives you a big buzz. And also the pressure on the steering wheel. They have sensors, and when the hands relax too much on the steering wheel, it's a sign that the muscles are relaxing. It's the first stage of sleep, so the car is going to give you maybe even an electroshock to wake you up. Now, Jingming bladder 1 is intimately connected here with stomach 1 and small intestine 19, the last point here, in front of the ear, small intestine 19, and large intestine 20. All of these points are controlling what we call the openings, the orifices of the head, the main ones, which explains that at the same time as there is the drowsiness and closing of the eyelids, also the hearing, somehow we don't close our ears, but the hearing, it becomes less acute, And the breathing also, that's why the first things people start breathing deeper, and sometimes when there are obstructions here, they start snoring in the nose. So these three orifices are controlled by the same point, and to help relax the orifices, there is a combination we do with the key opening point of Yang Chao and together with bladder 1. Now, I know the reticence of students to needle bladder 1. And I guess if, as a student, we haven't needled bladder 1, as acupuncturists, we are always going to tremble like that, and patients see this needle coming. So that's why one thing, I myself, I studied in France. French have very good theories, but practice is very sort of minimal. And we never needled in our school. And this was a school for doctors. They presumed that doctors know how to needle. False presumption. So we never needled. And of course, I watched my teachers needle, and they were barely sticking the needle in the skin. As long as the needle somehow stuck there, they were happy. Then I went to China, and one time I had a fabulous teacher. He had me needle bladder 1, and when he looked, he says, "What's that?" I said, "Jingming." He said. So he took a 1-chu needle, and he said, "Watch." And he went in all the way. And he said, he gave me another needle. He said, "You do the other side." Once you've done it, fear is gone. When you have understood that there is a lot of space between the eyeball and the bone socket, the eye socket, there is a lot of space. Needling has to be done gently. We don't do schlack like that and then get the thing. It's a gentle needling. You slide in the needle, and the needle paradoxically has to be slid towards the eyeball, because the eye socket is round. If you go straight in, you get stuck in the bone, simply. So you go like that, and it's a needling where you are really in touch with the tip of the needle, because you're going to encounter a lot of little blood vessels and little nerves there, which can be avoided. You have to feel it before the patient screams. Because once they scream, they tighten up, you tighten up, then you don't do your proper work. It's a practice. Once you've done it a few times, you'll see it's not a big deal. Now, for those still who are still doubting what I'm saying, there is, yin tang is a good replacement. It's not the same as Jingming bladder 1. It does not have the same pertinence, because the two extraordinary channels, the Chao channels, which are regulating the movements of Wei Qi. And remember, the Chao channels are given in the classics, symptoms getting worse at night or worse during the day. And what is insomnia? It's something getting worse at night. So it's obviously falling in the, they haven't mentioned it in those terms, but obviously they have indicated that it has to do with day and night things. For me, it's an obvious fact that Chao channels deal with management of these day and night cycles. They are not alone, but at least they are one. That's why in this context, when the orifices cannot relax, so the eye stays open, the ear, people say, "I hear everything. I hear everything." That means the hearing is there. Or people sometimes also describe like they can hear their heartbeat at night. Or tinnitus gets worse and keeps them awake. This is indication that this orifice has difficulty closing, and here we could use this concept. Of course, if it's the tinnitus and hearing, I also have the gallbladder 2, which is coming from the French school. Soulier de Morin has given the symptoms for gallbladder 2. One of the symptoms is waking after 3 in the morning. It's a very interesting, I've asked around, nobody can explain it energetically, why this point, but it works. I mean, I've given you at the end of the handouts, you have lists and lists of points which are indicated. What I'm saying is we have sometimes overused some points, Shenmen Heart 7 for all sleep problems. I mean, it's overused. And then it doesn't work always. Why? Because the condition is not appropriate. We don't give the same, okay, aspirin works for pain, but we don't give it for every kind of pain. In some cases, it doesn't work. In some cases, it makes it worse. If I have gastritis, if I take aspirin, it just makes it worse. So we have to also be reasonable in the choice of points. That's why the points are chosen according to channel systems or conditions that are affected in each person. That makes it for individualized acupuncture to be superior to symptomatic acupuncture. Now, once the Wei Qi has gone in from the head and face, it has to go through the neck area. And although I haven't mentioned it, in the neck area, often it can cause, when there is blockage here, it can cause snoring or sleep apnea. We know sleep apnea, there are two kinds. One most common kind is obstructive sleep apnea. So there's something obstructing the passage of the air. It can be often the sinuses, the nose, polyps in the nose. It can be in back of the throat. It can be the throat itself. And then, of course, we have the chest area. And we know that in Chinese medicine, usually what obstructs the passage is phlegm, dampness and phlegm especially. And we know that one area where phlegm obstructs classically is the throat area, what we call the plum pit feeling in the throat. And then, of course, the chest. The central apnea is much more difficult to treat. It comes, for some reason, the information which is sent down to the lungs just stops. And they have no concept about how to deal with that. In Chinese medicine, sleep apnea is a difficult condition to treat. By the way, I forgot to mention, we are talking about sleep. And of course, what interests us is not sleep, it's how to treat sleep problems. Now, the American Sleep Association has classified sleep problems. How many do you think we have sleep problems, besides insomnia? We have over 80. I wouldn't even be able to mention 20 of those. They have done all, in diagnosis we are very strong. It's like in dermatology. We have hundreds of diagnostic entities, but when we treat, we only have cortisone to propose. It's wonderful. In sleep problems, it's the same. There's over 80 classified sleep disturbances, insomnia being one of them, and primary insomnia. Primary insomnia means that there is no other cause. For example, you don't have a skin condition giving you itching, or you don't have a psychotic condition which keeps you awake, etc. Or pain, for example. That would give insomnia, but it's a secondary insomnia. Now, there's over 80, and a lot of them are classified in somatic disturbances. And a lot of these somatic disturbances are actually classified, if you wish, in the category of pathologies related to problems of movement of Wei Qi. Now, in the chest area, the Wei Qi also can stagnate. I remind you that the diaphragm is our last stance, protective stance against external pathogenic factors. If you recall, the three systems Chinese have used or described for dealing with external pathogenic factors. One is the Shenghanlun, the most classic, the oldest, which was respected, venerated almost, and never touched, although it's incomplete. And that's why only much later in the, I believe, 15th, 16th century, they came up with the Wenbing school and the Sanjiao, the triple warmer, dealing with damp heat. And in the triple warmer, the division is the upper triple warmer and the diaphragm being the last protective stance of the body, where Wei Qi accumulates to stop the pathogen from going further down. And obviously, this area during sleep could give us the sensations of waking with a feeling of heat and sweating. This is very much also what we see in menopause. In menopausal syndrome, women wake up with the sensation of stuffiness, tightness in the chest, and the heat and sweating. And the points which are given, we see that one of the points, which is the Geshu, bladder 17, which is also the Hui point of blood. And it's a very interesting point, actually indicated in the menopausal syndrome, which is not classical. We don't see it in classical text, but it's a very interesting point. Together with triple warmer 7, which has the same name, Zonghui, relating to Zongqi in the chest. Wei Qi has to make its way in and go through the Zangfu, especially the Zang organs. Remember that Zang are the ones that store. Therefore, they also store pathogenic factor. And that's what the role of Zongqi during the night is, to free up this pathogen. And at the end, they have to end up in the kidneys to be restored, because Wei Qi is part of Yang. It's an intricate, intimate part of Yang Qi, and it has to be rejuvenated in the kidneys. So usually the Wei Qi, after its circulation, ends up in the kidneys, and that's also somehow explaining that it's going to use the extraordinary channels to re-emerge at the corner of the eye to wake the person up. Now, when there is a sort of the Wei Qi cannot integrate its origin, the kidney, it might be diverted and come back up in different food organs, and this is going to give certain somatic manifestations during the night. And these somatic manifestations could be, for example, like very often teeth grinding, what we call bruxism, grinding of the teeth, and this might wake people up. Then also neck and shoulder tension, difficult bowels in the morning. People have dryness or hard stools, etc. You can have, with the bladder channel, you can have restless leg syndrome. It's not the only one responsible. That's one of the causes, restless leg syndrome, and cramps during the night, and of course sweating. With small intestine, we can have a lot of dryness, nighttime thirst, which actually also could be found with the stomach-yin deficiency. So sometimes it's difficult to distinguish between the two. And for example, with triple warmer, we can have drooling, and especially crusty eyes when people wake up and they have this sort of secretion which has dried up on the eyelids. And that is a sign that the triple warmer is involved. So these are a few examples of manifestations, what we call somatic manifestations. Yes?
Just got a question. Could you explain the relation between large intestine and teeth grinding? How does that channel affect teeth grinding?
The channel is intimately connected to the jaw, not only the primary channel, but also the Jingjin sinew channel, responsible of muscles, and usually, and teeth, of course. So the relation there, we know the yang ming is very closely related to the mouth and to the jaw and to the teeth. And actually, it's interesting to see that in children, teething occurs after introduction of other foods than the mother's milk. In a sense, the child has to process a foreign food. That's why teeth start coming out. So teething occurs now sooner because we are introducing foreign food much sooner than before. Even cow's milk is foreign food. So children have a tendency to teeth sooner, but the quality of the teeth are worse. This is what, to the great joy of dentists, they have much more work to do with our teeth, and now children in most industrialized countries we see have to wear braces because the teeth are not even. You go to the deep bush countries in Africa or in Australia, and people have perfect teeth with no hygiene. And here we have the best hygiene and we have absolutely lousy teeth. So there is something that we have lost, and it of course has to do also with a lot of eating habits. Okay, so basically all of these manifestations which could disrupt the sleep, these are not really, we could not call them primary insomnia. But obviously, those of you who have suffered from restless legs, it really can be a nuisance, or of course we know, for example, nighttime sweating or heat or hot flashes, etc., could be really disruptive to sleep. The basic approach for this, the basic treatment for this, the Wei Qi which starts going in, of course, is going in from Bai Hui to 20, but today this point seems to be more and more replaced in this condition by Si Chen Kong, the 4 points which are on the 4 directions of Bai Hui, and we usually start, some people start from the south and go clockwise, or they start from the east and go clockwise, and the needles are then removed in the opposite direction.
What's the purpose of that, using from east to?
Some things you just take them on face value. As I said, that's what the tradition says. You know, sometimes they say you start with this point, end with that, etc., etc. You would wonder, you know, originally I did not pay attention to the order of needling. For me, I would needle from top to bottom or bottom to top as it was, as it came. Sometimes I needle one side and then the other. More and more, I become a little bit more, how to say, it's like tea ceremony. You know, there is an order. Why is that? I don't know, but it's a nice ceremony. It's like I like to, for me, it's like also concentrates. I always start with the point which is for me the most important point. And then I follow in the structure. Sorry?
Clockwise is a right-hand screw.
Yes, yes. Of course, we're talking about the old clocks and not the electron.
When you say take out in reverse order, do you mean you take the last one in out first?
Yes, that's what, you know, in a lot of these, you know, these orders and numbers are very Taoistic. You know, for example, in the manipulation techniques, we have the famous technique of lighting fire on the mountain and cooling the heavens, etc. 9 and 6, and then it's done in a very specific manner. These numbers are symbolic. I don't really believe that if you, instead of 9 times, you did 8 times, it will not work. I don't believe that. But in a sense, I like, again, as I said, you know, in Qigong practice, you always do multiples of 9. 9 being the 3 times 3, 3 being the ultimate yang. And so the completion of yang is 3 times 3. So that's why number. All the ancient texts had 81 chapters. The number of hexagrams. The number of hexagrams. Why 81? 9 times 9. So you see that there is a, and then the chapters, I always was curious why one chapter is so long and another chapter is half a page. And one time I assisted Elisabeth Rochat-Lavallée lecture on numbers, symbolism of numbers. And it all has to do with the symbolic of the number and that chapter. So what is put in that chapter has basically to do with what that number represents in the Chinese tradition. Not so much that chapters are just 1, 2, 3, like a numerological order. The chapter number indicates something very specific. So once again, why orders? You know, here you are, of course, most of you, I suppose, are from the British school and dominated or mainly flavored by Worsley. And in the Worsley's work, Worsley, of course, never revealed his sources. He was actually getting very angry when people said, where did you get this from? And one of the very classical point combinations are the 7 dragons in the Worsley school. 7 dragons, you start it in a specific order, you follow it for men on the left or women on the right, and you do a spiral movement, and the needles are taken out in the reverse order. He's not here to ask why, but anyway, he would not have answered. Yes?
I want to ask you a question. From your experience, well, when would you use the 4 wise men? What pattern of the insomnia? The pattern of whatever pattern the insomnia is, which one would you use the 4 wise men? The 4 pattern of the head? 4 needles.
Oh, every time.
4 wise men.
Yeah, I didn't know.
Sorry.
When I don't have so many needles, because I'm also an adept of few needles. I don't like 30 needles in a session. It's not my style. Few needles. So if I'm using just that, it's not many needles. I use the Sichenkong. Otherwise, I replace it by Do20. It has, these 4 points, I find them have both exactly the same indications as Do20. They are both calming and also lifting. So we use it also for narcolepsy, for example, people who sleep a lot, which is the reverse. And we can use the same 4 points. I use it a lot for attention deficit in children. Of course, I don't do with needles, I do with the laser. So my idea is few needles. Now in this case, Sichenkong, stomach 12, Chue Pen, the famous point where all the yang channels move in. Again, one of the points students are not very happy to needle because they have heard that the pleura, the dome of the pleura is right under. And here, you know, we don't have much muscle. And most people, it's especially quite skinny. So they're scared to needle and punch a hole in the pleura. But again, with precaution, short needles, and proper precaution, you can very well needle them. And so the technique for all of these things is very simple. What we want to do is make the Wei Qi move inwards, make it go down. So stomach 12 is an excellent point which helps the interiorization of Wei Qi. And then we use the lower He points of those channels, or if they have a He point and the channel is going down, stomach 36, we use stomach 36. We use gallbladder 34 for gallbladder, and we use bladder 40 for bladder. For the other yang channels, which are actually on the arms and moving inwards, all of them have lower He points. And those are stomach 37, stomach 39, and bladder 39 for the other yang channels. Why are there these He points described? To extract pathogenic factor from the organs, from the Fu organs. This is one of the indications for the lower He points. And this is a very simple treatment. It works pretty well. It does not hear. There's no requirement to do heart 7, for example. It's absolutely inappropriate because the concept is a somatic disturbance because Wei Qi is not rooted where it should be rooted. Now we come to the mind. Of course, the body has to relax, and the relaxation of the body is depending on the Wei Qi moving properly in, and the mind has to relax. And we know one of the very important things about the heart, what they say, what is the function of the heart as emperor is the house of Shen. It houses the Shen, and we know that Shen is very intimately connected with blood. So in this sense, and that's one of the other substances we have to look at, and I'll talk about it in a moment, is the relation between the heart, Shen, and liver, Hun, and blood. They play a very important role in sleep. Now, what has to be understood is that there is a coordination that takes place between heart, liver, and kidney to manage sleep. And in this manner, liver sometimes has been referred to as the ambassador of the kidney, or again, the ambassador between heart and kidney. It's also interesting to see that another ambassador of the kidney is the pericard, what we call the fire minister, which is an extension of kidney fire, but working under the command of the heart. And we see that also pericard sometimes is referred to as the ambassador or the link between kidney and heart. So we see both, actually, if we stay with the tradition and name the channels as they were named originally, not how we have named them, but large intestine, small intestine. As we named them originally, both are Cue-yin channels. Pericard is arm Cue-yin, Chu-shu-yin, and liver is leg qu yin, zu qu yin. So we understand that they belong to the same channel. So it's not a surprise when we find certain aspects of their functions are in a way the same. Now, a few words about Shen. Of course, this you all know. The Shen, what we call the Shen, the spirit, the mind, the intelligence, the consciousness, the functions of the brain, is actually not just Shen. It's Shen in its 5 dimensions or aspects. That's why I like to use the image of the prism to show that what manifests as my life force and intelligence is actually the result of all the different so-called spirits. It's interesting, there were no terms given in the Chinese classics to designate Shen, Yi, Hun, Po, and Zhi. The chapter 13 of the Ling Shu, which is called the Benshen, the title of the chapter, mentions these spirits. So the French school has called them the Benshen. Machocha refers to them as the 5 wills, so 5 zhi of the organs, and then gives them translations or identities. So basically, the Shen is the sum total of these functions. So how I present myself, my presence, what is known as recognized from my character, intelligence, whatever, is the coordination between these 5. So in a sense, always Shen, I consider it sort of the director of a band, which gives the rhythm, but there are 5 musicians and they have to play in harmony, otherwise the music is painful to hear. Now, the way the mind functions is that awareness is one of the attributes of Shen. We say Shen has several attributes. One of them is consciousness, that I'm awake, I'm conscious, that's Shen. But doesn't mean I'm intelligent or clever or enlightened. It's just I'm not in a coma. The difference. So Shen, one of the, I remind you there are 20 translations for Shen in Chinese medicine alone. There's a French author, Jean-Marc Essalé, has written a book called Shen. It's this thick. He's taken all the passages in the Chinese classics mentioning Shen and the context it was mentioning. It's extremely boring to read, unless you are a sinologist and you are interested in that. Of course, I sort of trudged through it the best I could, but it's very, very painful. But it's more than 20 different contexts for Shen. Obviously, it's one of those words which it's very difficult to, so we call it spirit, but that's vague. What kind of spirit? What is spirit? So that's why it's very difficult. Anyway, in this case, awareness is Shen. And when you're aware, sensory input, we know, are received by the brain, interpreted by the brain, and understood. We call that Shenming, clarity of the mind, and the clarity of the mind, we know, is maintained by what is known, this obscure, clear yang of the stomach, which goes up to keep the mind awake and acute. So that's what clear yang basically is referring to, is the clear qi, which is pulled out of food and nourishment, and it's carried up, and it's actually an aspect of wei qi. The wei qi, which is part of its action, is to keep that acuity, clarity, and we know that wei qi goes to all the openings, and it maintains also their function and their moisture. Wei qi travels together with thin fluids, the jing fluids. It's a very complicated thing, but slowly it falls into place. Anyway, the information, the brain translates that information and sends it, or in a way, another aspect of the brain will analyze it to understand. Analyzed by what? Analogy. I've seen this before. and there's an analysis, the color is yellow, the shape is this, so it must be a lemon. Okay? So this is the function of the yi. That's why we say yi. Machocha calls it the mind. It can be thinking. It can also be memory. So that's the analytical part of the brain which analyzes. And once the analysis is done, the information is sent further in to be stored in the zhi, the aspect of kidney. Also related to memory. I remind you, memory actually, we can say three main organs, shen, yi, and zhi, are active in the memory process, but also hun and po, and that's very interesting. So in this normal waking stage, experience is analyzed and stored. That's very clear. In this case, hun and po are just making sure we know that hun makes things come and go, and po ensures things enter and exit. So that means that free movement. Now, what is interesting is what happens when Shen is disconnected? What happens to the information which comes in? So sensory input comes in, but what happens is when Shen is disconnected, Yi doesn't function. Yi is the analytical side. It's like, I always say, it's like the computer. So the Yi is the software. And the Yi is there to do the function. And if the Shen, if you sort of unplug or shut down the computer, your software is not functioning anymore. So who takes over? Hun and Po, what we call the animal spirits. The instinctual spirits take over. But they don't function the same way as the Yi does. Po stores physical sensations and pain, what we call physical information. And Hun stores sensations, stores impressions, emotions, for example, are stored by Hun. Now, what happens to this information? Obviously, it's not analyzed, and it's not broken down, and it's not stored. So where is it going to go? The experience is there. The sense has been absorbed. Where is it stored? Po is going to store it in the surface, in the muscles, for example, and Hun will store it somehow in the subconscious. But these are not analyzed, which means that the whole experience is stored exactly the way it came in. As a result, every time you touch it, there is going to be a manifestation as though you were experiencing that situation right then. The Chinese have given it a name, Gui, ghost. Now, what is Gui? Gui is an entity which does not have a name, a manifestation that does not have an explanation. You want examples? We have hundreds. A lot of phobias. I'm scared of arachnophobia. I'm scared of spiders. I'm scared of snakes. I'm scared of people who are scared of dirt, microbes. You can be scared of anything. Allergies. A lot of allergies are strange reactions to something which is not aggressive, a pollen, a flower, a cat hair, or something. We have all these manifestations. For example, some words provoke reactions in us which are unexplainable. So common words, money. Love. Why? These are words. But in us, we have had an experience that has been negative. And we didn't manage to deal with it at the time it happened. Why? Because maybe it was an accident. The shock was so strong, I went in a coma. I didn't feel the pain, but the pain was felt by the body. All my bones broke. So that memory is kept in the body by pull. I was sick. I had a fever, and I heard my parents speak, and one said, something or another. The feverish state is like a semi-coma, but the ear hears, the impression is registered. A lot of allergies they have discovered are associations of things. You were a child, you had fever, high fever, your head was stuffy, your nose was runny, your eyes were itching, and you noticed a cat walking on the wall. And later on, every time you see the cat, your body goes into the same reaction. You have an allergy. And because the body is very intelligent, it will find an explanation. That's why when you do allergy tests, it's going to show allergic to cat hair. It's amazing. What we call psychosomatic diseases. Stomach ulcers are classic. The stomach ulcer, there is no ulcer the first time you get the stomach pain. The stomach pain is coming because you were in a situation where you had to say no and you didn't. You had to swallow something. You didn't want to swallow. So there is a pain, there is a holding, Now the Shen wants to know why there is a pain and asks the Yi, why is there pain? And the Yi cannot answer. So after a while, the Yi is embarrassed to tell the emperor, sorry, I don't know why there is pain. So he's going to make a hole in the stomach, and now he says it's the hole in the stomach. Time? Sorry. Yeah, okay. I just finished with this. So psychosomatic medicine can be very well explained by these subconscious reactions of the body. And of course, we'll come back to it to analyze this in relation to dreams. Yes?
Is all this stuff in your book?
Yes. Sorry? I cannot hear. Sorry.
In Charlie Buck's talk this morning, he talked about the people who were doing post-traumatic stress counselling, who went to Japan after the
Right.
and found that people didn't have post-traumatic stress disorder. Can we assume that somehow the Japanese people were conscious enough not to switch their Shen off with the shock, so they processed it through you?
That's a possibility because actually the way they dealt with it was a bit abnormal, to accept the explanations and say, okay. I found it a bit strange. I have been more revolted, but they were much more. It's their character also. There was an acceptance of the situation. Explain. Because when you are in a situation, like in a situation of now I spoke about physical trauma, it could be psychological trauma. Abuse, for example, is one of those, especially a small child. A small child who's abused will shut off the Shen and does not have the explanation to explain why this is happening to him or her. And there it creates the Gui. But that's why we work out also with it, is to go back and bring the Shen and bring the Yi. Once you do that, the explanation, you dissolve the... Possibly. Possibly. It's a certain education, it doesn't happen. You have what we call the training of the mind. An acceptance of something which is inevitable takes away part of the pressure. And they must have done that. It's, in a way, it's a Buddhist approach. For Western people, it's very hard to swallow. Buddhists say, well, you accept. What do you mean you accept? You accept and you forgive. It's very hard for us. Okay, sorry about going over. Thank you. it continues after the break. Huh? It's not done. It's not finished.